Today's daf we're going to be learning is Gittin Daf Pe'alef. We're going to be learning, this is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to be learning a bunch of Mishnayot today, kind of jumping from topic to topic with small Gemaras on those Mishnayot. Katav legaresh et ishto v'nimlach. Somebody decides to divorce his wife and then changes his mind. Beit Shammai omrim psalam min hakehuna. Just this we talked about also reach haget. There's this concept of she was already, the intent was to divorce her. So already at that point, Beit Shammai is stringent and says she already can't marry a Kohen. Beit Hillel omrim, he goes to the other extreme. You could have received a get, but because it was based on a certain stipulation, if the stipulation never happened and the get was never a get, you can still marry a Kohen. So if your husband dies and then you're not a divorcee and then you want to go marry a Kohen, the fact that he gave you a get on condition does not preclude you from marrying a Kohen. So Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Menashe from Dvil, sends a question to Shmuel. Yilamdenu Rabbeinu, please teach us what the halacha is. Yatsa alav kol ish ploni kohen katav get lishto. If there's a rumor going around that somebody wrote a get to his wife, notice the language, wrote a get. Wrote doesn't mean he gave, or maybe it does. And they see that they're married and he's a Kohen. So if they were divorced and remarried, it would be a problem because a Kohen is not allowed to remarry his divorced wife because she's a divorcee. Shalach le Shmuel wrote back to him, you might remember Shmuel did something similar in a case where he said, kitvu to get lishti, and then like he had said, tell the sofer to write it, and then the sofer wrote it. Or whatever, they told the sofer to write, not that he told the sofer to write, they told the sofer to write it. And then there was this whole question, and she was remarried, and Shmuel said, Tetzei v'adavar tzarich Talmud. Okay, so it's very similar to here. Hadavar tzarich b'dika. In other words, he said, make her get divorced from the second husband, but we have to look into this more. So interesting that it's the same Shmuel, it's almost the same language, it's definitely the same idea. Anyway, that seems to be his approach. Listen, better off making her get her divorce from the second husband because maybe she really was divorced from the first, and now we have a problem because she is in this case, my confusion, there was the second marriage. This case, we make her get divorced from the Kohen she's married to because there's a rumor going around that she's a divorcee and she's married to a Kohen. But it needs looking into. So to which they ask, why does it need looking into? Maybe the issue is, well, do we suppress rumors or not suppress rumors? And this is our responsibility as a community. If we have a rumor that we think is unfounded, do we say, no, there's no such rumor, this isn't true, or not? Well, if that's his case, and basically how seriously to take this rumor, can't possibly be that Shmuel said was thinking that maybe it would be okay because maybe it's our job to suppress this rumor. Well, HaNaharda, Atre de Shmuel. We know that Shmuel was the Rosh Hashiva in Naharda. That was his city. Uba Naharda, lo mevat lekala. And the ruling in Naharda is that we don't do this kind of thing. We don't say cancel rumors. Why don't we cancel rumors? Really good question. Rashi says here, lo ayu noagim dayanei ir l'shatkan. They wouldn't silence rumors. Mipnei achashad shelo yotziu kol shemachzikim yedei ovrei avera. We were worried that maybe the people will think that we're helping people who sin. And if the community starts suppressing rumors, maybe they're protecting people who really did sin. In other words, what they're saying is we take rumors seriously, so seriously that even if people think it's not true, maybe it really is true. And maybe just people are saying it's not true because they want to say, oh, it can't be those people did something wrong, but they really did. So it can't possibly be he was concerned with that because in his city, there was a clear ruling that we don't cancel rumors at all. We don't suppress them. So what might it be? Maybe it's that when people said he wrote the guy, maybe wrote means give. So then they say, if that's the issue, then if you instead of giving, you say writing, then what do you write for writing? In other words, then what would it mean what would you say if the rumors were he wrote a get? Well, there would be no way to say write if write means give. Now, it's not exactly true, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. The Gemara says, no, there is still writing, could be writing, but the Imagal Yamilta to Karol Intina Ktiva, Dilma Natan Kamre. And that's really what we thought originally, which is It's just unclear. Right could mean give, and right could mean right. So the whole thing is when there's this rumor going around that he wrote a get, the question is the rumor just that he wrote it and was thinking of giving a get to his wife, or is the rumor that he gave it? And since writing could mean giving or it could mean writing, therefore we don't really know, and maybe that was his concern, that maybe it really just meant that the rumors going around that people that he wrote a get. Teitzei, 1 minute. She gets divorced here? We make her get divorced? Rav Ashi says, if there's rumors about a woman before she's married, let's say, rumors spreading around that she is betrothed to some man. Okay? So we believe it, and we assume she's betrothed, and we don't allow her to marry anyone else. Let's say a woman comes to court, says, I want to get married. Someone says, hey, I heard that she got married to someone else. Well, then we don't let her marry this person. We take the rumor seriously. But once she's married, we assume that she's with this husband and that everything's fine. And we don't start assuming there's a rumor they're divorced, that they're divorced. That's not a rumor that we accept. So once they're married, we assume they stay in their status. We retain status quo unless otherwise known. To which the Gemara says, so my teitzei nami, teitzei misheni. Wait, teitzei means, as I accidentally said before, it means if, let's say, they were together, then there was a rumor they were divorced, that he wrote her again, which maybe means gave her again. Then, which Shmuel was ruling on was not that we make them get divorced because there's a rumor that they're divorced, which again does sound quite strange, that because there's a rumor going around that they're divorced, we make them get divorced. Again, he's a Kohen. It's not like a regular marriage, but yes, there's a rumor that he's married to a divorcee. But now we say, no. Based on that, we assume status quo. We assume they're still married. What's the issue though? Let's say he dies and she goes and marries someone else. Then we make her get divorced from the second husband because there's a rumor that she was a divorcee. It would have to be that she married a Kohen. She married a Kohen in her first marriage and she married a Kohen in her second marriage. So then they say, in Ken, if you want to say that, well, now you're going to have a whole problem, because if you divorce her, let's say she got divorced let's say there was a rumor going around this year, 2023. Then she stays married to her husband because we don't make her get divorced. She has some kids with him. And then in 2025, he dies. In 2026, she goes to marry another Kohen. And in 2027, they find out about this rumor that was at the time. And someone says, how could you be married to a Kohen? Don't you remember there was this rumor going on in 2023? And they say, you're right. We make her get divorced. Now, that means that we're basically declaring she was divorced from 2023. So her kids that were born, let's say in 2024, would be halalim because they're children born from a divorcee and a Kohen. The children are halalim. So if we mess her up now, that's going to basically mess up any children she had with her husband after the rumors started to be spread. To which they answer, people will look and say, wait a minute. The court made her get divorced from the second husband, but they didn't make her get divorced from her first husband. So it must be, people will think that it's not based on the early rumor. Now it is based on the early rumor, but people will look and say, but if it was based on the early rumor, they would have made her get divorced in the first place, right? All the way back then. The fact that they're only making her get divorced now must mean that there's some other rumor that we never heard about, and there must be some concern that she actually got a divorce from her first husband sometime just before he died. And then we're not worried that people are going to say, oh, your children from the first marriage after that rumor was spread are all halalim, and which are disqualified kohanim because they're born from an inappropriate relationship between a kohen and someone he's not permitted to have a relationship with. So no, we're not worried about that. Okay, so this was a long-winded way to get to what was Shmuel's safek when he said this. There was a rumor spread about a woman whose husband wrote a get. In the end, we say, because writing could mean giving, it could mean just writing, and therefore we're worried that maybe the rumor is that he gave the get, but not enough to mess her up in the first marriage because of this idea of not accepting, keeping status quo once someone's married, not accepting rumors to ruin people's marriages, but we will allow it to ruin her if she goes and gets married to someone else. She won't be able to marry a Kohen, and if she is, we'll make her get divorced. And that must be the case that Shmuel was talking about. And again, then we're not worried about the halalim of the other kids because people will just think that it must have happened just before he died. So Rabbi Rochana quotes Rabbi Yochanan, who's quoting Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eli, saying, famous Rabbi Yehuda mentioned in the Mishnah all the time, the Dorot Rishonim were much more cautious and careful and better, so to speak. Dorot Rishonim Beit Shammai, Dorot Achronim Rabbi Dosa. Dorot Rishonim or Beit Shammai, who basically said, just because someone thought or started writing a get to divorce his wife, changed his mind once he wrote the get, right? And changed his mind. I think I wasn't careful about this, but he wrote a get actually, and then didn't give her the get. That already, right? This is what we call rech get. There's this get written for her. That already disqualifies her from marrying a Kohen. So that was very cautious. Rabbi Dosa, though, was the opposite. He's a later rabbi. He was really not careful about things. Titania shvuya ochela b'tchuma. A woman who was taken into captivity, we're always worried that she was raped by her captors, and therefore she wouldn't be able to eat truma anymore. So divrei Rabbi Yossi is that she can eat truma. Amar Rabbi Yosef, what we're going to disqualify her from kahuna. Let's say she's a bat kohen or she's married to a kohen. We're going to disqualify from kahuna just because he maybe touched her body, right? Doesn't mean he slept with her, as we don't assume rape, right? We don't assume the worst. So this is kind of the opposite approach of Beit Shammai. Another comment about the same idea. Right? How generations have gotten worse, people have gotten worse. In the first generation, they would bring in their fruits through, I'm trying to remember the definition of this word, derech hakvusha michutz likanes lefnim, b'domeh l'shu lashon yavani, traxing. She's not helping me enough. 1 second. They would bring it through I think it just means the main entrance, but I think it might be a little bit more than that. Yeah, it's just the main entrance. Okay. Just going to see. Yeah, the gate, through the main gate. Okay. Some people think that it's actually the gate of the courtyard. Okay. They would bring them through the main gate. In that way, they would basically, everybody would then it would be clear that they're obligated in the Maasrot. Okay. Because we're going to get to this whole machloket about it. But in later generations, they came up with a legal loophole to avoid giving the trumot maslo, avoid hiding the produce. What would they do? They would basically bring it through the roof, bring it through some enclosure they had, where basically it would be in their possession, but it wouldn't go through the main gate. And if it doesn't go through the main gate, it's exempt from masr. There's a whole big debate: exempt entirely? Does it just drop it from deoraita to Rabbanan? All different debates about exactly how this works, but the basic Torah obligation is to go through the front door, the main entrance. It's called Re'iyat Pnei Habayit, and it sees kind of the entrance to the house. And here we're going to see it inside. This is in what we call the Vidoy Maaser, when you do the declaration of the Maaser. I took care of all my Maasers. I took out what I was supposed to from the house, etc., all that. The pasuk before that, and this is really where the drasha comes from, is right before that. It says, you will eat them in your courtyards. And from there, they learn that the sha'ar is the entrance. It has to go through the main entranceway in order to be obligated to maaser. Oh, by the way, that's what it is. Some people say, if it's only rabbinic, then you can actually eat, if let's say you brought it through your roof, and it was only a chiyuv de rabbanan, you'd be able to eat achilat arai in your house. You could eat it like if you're just snacking without taking maaser. Like in your field, you can snack without taking maaser. So if you don't, until it comes into your house, you can still snack at it without taking maaser. So that was also possibly what they were trying to avoid doing. Again, some people say you're not obligated at all, even on a rabbinic level, even if it's a full meal, you still wouldn't be obligated if you did it in that back, through the back door. So now we're going to see a different opinion, though. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Filu Chatzer Kovad. It's not just a house, even in your courtyard. Shene'emar, and he darshan that pasuk that I just quoted. Achlu b'sha'arecha v'saveyu. So the going into the courtyard itself is enough to obligate. It doesn't actually only have to be in the house, which is the opinion that we saw before. Okay, so these were two statements of what we call yiridat hadorot. Things are just getting worse as time goes on. New Mishnah. Hamaгаreshet ishto v'lana imo b'pundaki. we have a man who divorces his wife, and then they sleep together in an inn, the two of them alone. Beit Shammai says, we're not concerned that they are married again because they slept together. We'll talk about exactly what the concern seems to be, that maybe they slept together, and if they did, maybe they did it l'shem kiddushin. Maybe they wanted to get remarried, so he consummated a new betrothal. Did it, as we know, you can betroth a woman through sexual relations, so maybe that was what happened. But he says you don't need another get. They're clearly divorced. You don't have to worry about that. She needs a new get if she wants to get remarried, because there's a concern that maybe he betrothed her. And what's the situation? By the way, we saw this all, and we're going to have a whole different understanding of this machloket between them from the Tosefta that Rabbi Yochanan is going to adopt, that we're going to get to in the Gemara, which we saw in a whole sugya previously. When does this work? When is this true? It's only if they were alone in an inn after they were already married. If they were alone in an inn after they were betrothed only, and as they were betrothed, divorced from betrothal, and then alone in a room together, we're not worried that anything happened, because they're not used to having been with each other in a bedroom, sleeping together, because in Erusin that generally didn't happen, and therefore we're not concerned about that, only if it was from marriage. So now the Gemara starts off with what I mentioned to you. Amar Rav Bar Amar Rabbi Yochanan. We saw the sugya, it was in Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Bet. So Rabbi Bar Chana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, machloket b'shera'u shenivala. The machloket is when he actually saw that, when they saw that she had relations. Okay, in other words, there were witnesses that saw this couple having relations together. Turning now to Amud Bet, de Beit Shammai savrai adam oseh bi'lato bi'latznut, u'Beit Hillel savrai ein adam oseh bi'lato bi'latznut. So Beit Shammai held that people will sleep with a woman out of marriage just for the purposes, for no real purpose at all other than just sleeping with her. And Beit Shammai savri ein adam oseh bi'lato bi'latznut. Beit Hillel holds, I said Beit Shammai, I think I said Beit Shammai by accident. This whole machloket is, we know they have relations. Now, that's not what it said in the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah said, Lani Mobapundaki. He was alone with her in a room, but nobody saw him. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, the whole machloket is when he saw, the witnesses saw that they have relations. And it's just a question of, we don't know what the point of the relations was. So Beit Shammai says, people sleep around. They were just sleeping together. Beit Hillel says, no, people wouldn't just do that randomly. It must have been with a purpose. It must have been purposeful. Must have been he did it for the sake of betrothal again. Aval, but in the case where lo ra'u shenivala, which is what we thought the Mishnah was talking about, if you have already two spekot, you don't even know if they had relations. And if you have relations, you don't know what the purpose was, no one's going to be worried that she needs another get. However, they're going to question this from the language of our Mishnah. It's none. It says in a case of betrothal, nobody is worried. Because we assume he hasn't slept with her yet. He's probably not sleeping with her now. Well, you can't possibly say the case is someone saw they have witnesses saw they have relations, because then it shouldn't matter if they're betrothed or they're married. The point is, right, if they were divorced from betrothal or divorced from marriage, the point is they obviously have relations. So then it just becomes a question back to Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. Was the relations for no good reason, or was the relations for the purposes of betrothal? Or do you at least have to be concerned that it was for the purposes of betrothal? So therefore, there's no way to read the Mishnah that way, in which case they say Elamat Nitin is clearly our Mishnah is B'shelo Ra'u Shenivala. And Rabbi Yochanan, how can Rabbi Yochanan go against our Mishnah? Da'amar Ki Tana, I already told you this. He goes like the Tana of the Tosefta. Titania, as it says in the Tosefta, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, which is Rabbi Yochanan holds like him, exactly what he said. If nobody saw anything transpire and they were just in a room alone, nobody's worried. Not Mina Erusin, not Mina Nisuin, nobody's concerned. She doesn't need a get. What's their machloket about? And this is exactly what Rabbi Yochanan said, and it appears explicitly in the Tosefta. And that's the machloket. Would someone just sleep around for no reason, or would he not only sleep with her if he had the intent of betrothing? And then she would need a new get, and that's Beit Hillel. So now we have to go. If nobody saw her having relations and they were just alone in a room, then what's the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel? So now we have to explain the machloket differently. According to this, so that's what we know. There's edim that saw yichud, it saw them going into a room alone together, but they didn't see anything happen in the room. This, by the way, reminds us of edei yichud at a wedding. We have edim that go check the room, make sure no one's in there. Then that the couple is alone together. They stand outside the room. They have no idea what's going on in the cheder yichud, and right, so they just know that this couple was together in the room by themselves. So in the case where we only have edei yichud and not edei bia, I'll get back to the yichud room in a minute. Beit Shammai savre lo amrinan hein edei yichud vehein edei bia. We don't say just because they saw yichud, they can. It's as if we have witnesses that there was bia in the room, that they have relations. Ubeit Hillel, and that's why we're not worried that assuming they have relations. Beit Hillel savre amrinan hein edei yichud vehein edei bia. Any witnesses who saw them go into the room alone together, we can assume that it was as if we have testimony that they actually have relations. And if we can have testimony they actually have relations, we're going to make her get another get, because then again, Beit Hillel assumes if they have relations, well, then it goes back to the Ro'ua Shenivala case. It's as if they saw her having relations, and then we have to be concerned that he did it l'shem kiddushin. However, Modim benit garshim and Erusin, however, they both agree that when it's from the Erusin, she'enes rechaim enu get sheni, tekeva de en libo gaspa lo amrin an hein etebia. But only, right, if you have a married couple and they go into a room alone, even though they were married and divorced, the assumption is if you saw them go into the room and there's witnesses that they went into the room, the assumption is they must have had relations. But if they were only betrothed, that they've never had relations before, then we can't necessarily assume that they have relations. So therefore, in that case, the edei yichud are not the edei bia, and that's why there's right. The machloket is not in that right in the erusin case, and that's what the Mishnah is telling us. To which we so now let's get back to yichud. So what is yichud at a wedding? It's a really good question, and there's debates among the commentaries. Is yichud actually right? You're supposed to have enough time that they, technically speaking, could have had relations, but people don't generally have relations in the yichud room. I don't know if anybody ever does, but there are some opinions that say that that was really the original purpose, that they did have relations in the yichud room. And again, here you have the witnesses. Now, some people say it's only when they designated the witnesses, because you need edei kiddushin. Now, how do you have edei kiddushin? If what they need to do is they need to witness the act of having relations, the betrothal through. So if he designated the witnesses to be his edei yichud, then we can assume that that's witnesses that they basically have relations, likrat kiddushin, because also kiddushin needs witnesses. You can't say he did it l'shem kiddushin, there were no witnesses. So it would have to be the edei yichud or the witnesses. And again, some people think that that's really what the edei yichud, at least at some point, according to some opinions, the edei yichud, the purpose of them was to kind of have testimony that the couple consummated the marriage. Mostly nowadays, it's really just symbolic. It's not this. And even then, not everybody thought it was that was the purpose of the yichud room. But anyway, I thought I would just bring it up. Again, requires further research to understand more in detail than what I'm giving you here about the yichud room. Okay, now we have one last question about this sugya before we move on to the next. Wait a minute. Isn't there this principle? How can Rabbi Yochanan hold by the Tosefta against the Mishnah? We have a principle that we've seen many times. When you have a Mishnah without a machloket, we paskin that way. And our Mishnah brought this machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. And basically, the reading of the Mishnah does not follow the reading of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan goes by the Tosefta, not the Mishnah. So, ukimna lemanitim b'shalo ra'ua, and halakha kisam Mishnah, and ukimna lemanitim b'shalo ra'ua shenivalas. How could he say? Right, we said the Mishnahs, they didn't see anything transpire. And he says the Mishnah, we go like the Tosefta, where their machloket is when they did see something. To which we answer, Amarai nenu v'aliv to Rabbi Yochanan. Notice if you Rabbi Bar Chana brought this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. That's how we started. So that's his understanding of Rabbi Yochanan. But others say Rabbi Yochanan holds like Stam Mishnah and holds like the Mishnah. So there's a debate about what exactly Rabbi Yochanan held. So to summarize this part of our daf, we started with, by the way, the two statements before this was also Rabbi Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan about the Dorot HaRishonim, or not, right? The nowadays generations are not like the previous. So now we got to this Mishnah about a couple that's secluded in a hotel after they already got divorced. Do we have to assume something transpired here? Is the machloket in a case of where we actually have witnesses that saw them have sexual relations, or is they just saw them go into the room alone. And that was the difference between the Mishnah and the Tosefta and Rabbi Yochanan, who went like the Tosefta, although perhaps maybe some people think Rabbi Yochanan went like our Mishnah, because halakha kastam Mishnah. And then we had two different ways of understanding the machloket. Do we assume people will do bi'ilato bi'ilat znut, won't care, have relations with her for no good reason? Or do we assume ein adam oseh bi'ilato bi'ilat znut, that people wouldn't do this? Or is it the machloket? Do we assume that Eidei Yichud can function as your Eidei Bia or not? New Mishnah. Now we have to understand something called a get mekushal. A get mekushal is a get that often they did for kohanim. They didn't want kohanim to divorce their wives very quickly, because once you divorce your wife, you can't remarry her. Whereas a regular person divorces their wife, you can go back and remarry them. But the kohen can't because she's divorced. So what they said was, we're going to basically make you make a much more complicated get. Called the get mekushal. They write a line or two, then leave a space, fold it, sew it up, then do the next line or two, fold it, sew it, then another two. And every fold, you leave this blank line, every fold a different witness signs. The minimum amount of folds is 3. You can have more. You can leave the rest of the get just written regular. As long as you have 3 folds, that's a get mekushar, and that's really to avoid, it's a different type of get. And the rules are that if you do this get mekushar, you must have a signature on every fold. Okay? So now we're going to learn all sorts of things about it. Knasa beget kireach, if she gets married based on having a get kireach, she married some other man, she had a get kireach. What's a get kireach? A bald get. What does this mean? It means there was a get mekushar with all these folds, but it was missing at least one of the signatures. So one place was blank. Another get where the get is disqualified. She has to get divorced from both husbands, right? In other words, again, she's not really married to the first, even though right, she is, because she really is married to the first because the get was no good, but she has to get divorced from him, and she also has to get divorced from the second husband, etc. Now, get kerach, hakol mashlimim alav. Now we have a different machloket. You have a get kerech. Let's say you don't have enough kosher witnesses. So anyone can sign on the extra ones. 2, at least we think right now. 2 is the minimum. You have to have 2 good kosher witnesses. After that, anyone can sign. Even if they're a general pasulei dude, they're a robber, they're a relative. Divrei Ben Nanas. That's what Ben Nanas says. Rabbi Akiva Omer, he distinguishes. And mashlimim alav ela krovim ha'reuyim laha'i b'makom acher. It's only witnesses who can actually testify in another situation, meaning not psulei edut like robbers, gamblers, things like that, but relatives. If you have your relatives sign, that's fine. Ezu get kerech. What is a get kerech? Koshek sharav merubim me'edav. It's tied, the amount of ties you have are more than the amount of witnesses, meaning you have all these blank spaces, you fill them in, but you missed one, right? So at every fold, you have to have witnesses. So if you have more folds than witnesses, it means you're missing any signatures, right? Even if you're missing one. So now they say, my time to get kerech. The Gemara wants to know, why is this disqualified? The reason why this is disqualified is because we're worried that we assume that the amount of ties that they made could have corresponded to the amount of witnesses he wanted. And it could be he said to a group, we've learned this case a number of times, all of you, I want you to sign. And then he made enough, he made sure that the sofer tied enough blank spaces for each witness. And then if one of them is missing, it's a problem, right? Because theoretically, we have 2 kosher witnesses. What could be the problem? The problem is we're worried. We don't know. It's just a concern that maybe kulcha. And again, this is an extreme thing. Because we're concerned about that, we're going to make this woman, right, disqualify her get. But the truth is the get would be disqualified if he said, all of you I want to sign, and they didn't all sign. Get kerech hakol mashlimim alav. So now they ask for Rabbi Akiva, Eved my time alo. So now, why can't an Eved? Okay, according to Rabbi Akiva, only, right, here's another case of a pasul witness, an Eved Knani, a Canaanite slave. Why not? We're worried if we let him sign on this get, people will think he could sign on other documents. Well, then they say, well, that should apply for a relative also. They don't think relatives can sign on other documents. So they changed their answer. We're worried that if an Eved signed in a shtar, people will think he's a Jew and they'll marry him off to a Jewish woman. And we know from all those Daf Yomi we learned about slaves earlier in the Masechet, they can't marry a Jewish woman. So maybe if we're just worried about Yuchsin and marriage, well, let's take a thief. A thief can get married to a Jewish woman. So why don't we allow a thief if we're just worried that, we'll think he's a kosher witness, and alamat now. Why does Rabbi Akiva say them? Rabbi Akiva Omer, so again, that doesn't really fit the bill for what Rabbi Akiva says, because he says only krovim. To which they answer, karov in, right? Karov, sorry, this is just the inference. Karov in gazlano. It sounds like he's only saying a relative and not a thief. To which they give a third answer to the Eved, because they want to have something that matches kind of the other situations. We're worried about an Eved that people might think that he was freed if we allow him to sign. And what would be the same about a Gazlan? Gazlan nami atu lemeimar tshuva aved. We might think by a robber that he did tshuva. Now, once a thief does tshuva, it's a whole fascinating sugya in Sanhedrin we'll get to about at what point we know that they did tshuva. But let's assume, people will see, they'll assume he must have done the tshuva that's necessary. And then they'll let him sign another document. And it's not true. So that's the worry. Okay? The Eved will worry people will think he's freed. The thief, we're going to think that this situation is rectified. Now, this explains why he allows a relative, because karov a karov can never be fixed in any way to then become able to sign on your documents. They're always going to be your relative. There's no such thing as the relative won't be related to you anymore. So therefore, no one's going to worry about that, and that's why Rabbi Akiva allows a relative, but nobody else. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rabbi Bar Sheilta, Amar Rav Hamnuna Saba. So now Rabbi Zera passes on in the name of Rabbi Sheilta, in the name of Rav Hamnuna Saba, that Amar, and who said in the name of Amar Rav Ad Bar Ava. We have a long line here of people. Get kereach, sharav shiv'a ve'edav shisha. If you have a get kereach, what would be an example? You have 7 blank spaces and only 6 people signed, or shisha ve'edav chamisha, 6 blank spaces, only 5 people signed. Chamisha ve'edav arba'a, 5, again, blank spaces or folds, and 4, and knots, basically, it was knotted, it was sewn, and 4 witnesses, arba'a ve'edav shlosha, 4, and there were 3, ad kam machloket benanas for Rabbi Akiva. In all those cases, we're basically going to say that's the machloket between benanas and Rabbi Akiva. In other words, that's when they all disagree about who these other, what could be. But when it comes to, you'll understand in a second. Ksharav shlosha ve'edav shnayim. If you have 3 folds and only 2 witnesses signed, divrei hakol emash lemim alav el karov. Even Ben Nanas agrees that the only one who could sign the third signature has to either be a totally kosher witness or a relative. It can't be one of those psulei edut. So after Rabbi Zera passes down the name of Rabbi Bar Sheilta, who passed it in the name of others, he says to him, I'm a Rabbi Zera, the Rabbi Bar Sheilta. The 3 in a get mekushar, you're saying, is basically like 2 in a regular get. You need a minimum of 3 of a higher level. For the mahatam karov lo, achachinami karov lo. As a get mekushar, the whole point is it has to be more. The rules are minimum 3. If it's minimum 3, then let's do the analogy. A regular get needs minimum 2. A get mekushar needs minimum 3. So the 2 that are the basic needs for a get have to be kosher witnesses. The 3 should also have to be kosher. So why does everyone agree that a karov is good? It doesn't make any sense. So Amarlei afladidi kashali. So Rabbi Bar, what was his name? Rabbi Bar Sheilta says, I also didn't understand that. Ushilta the Rav Hamnuna, and I asked Rav Hamnuna, who told me what Rav Ad Bar Ava said. For Rav Hamnuna, the Rav Ad Bar Ava, in other words, they all asked the previous till we got to the first person who started this. But Amarlei, and he said, Hanach l'shlosha b'mekusha delav deoraita. Mekusha is only a takana derabanan. So because it's rabbinic, we allow a relative. And in fact, Tanya Namihach, here's a brighter to support this. Get kerach, support this statement of Rav Ad Bar Ava. Get kerach sharav shiva ve'edav shisha, shisha ve'edav chamisha, chamisha ve'edav arba'a, arba'a ve'edav shlosha. Exactly all the cases we said, right? It's missing 1, whether it's, there's 7, it's got 6, 5, 6 and 5, 5 and 4, 4 and 3. Ad kamachloka ben nanas for Rabbi Akiva. In all those cases, they disagree about who those extra witnesses could be. But Hishlim alav eved ben nanas omer havlad kashel, Rabbi Akiva omer havlad mamzer. Okay, that's the machloka where if, let's say, a slave did that signature, that 6 out of 7, the 6 out of 6 signatures, or the 7th out of the 7, right? He says it's fine. Rabbi Akiva says the vlad is a mamzer. Okay, Rabbi Akiva says that's no good. It can only be a relative. Ava, But ksharav shlosha ve'edav shnayim, exactly what we were discussing. Again, this is a bright to support what we just said. If the ksharav or shlosha and edim are shnayim, then what do we say? Divrei hakol en mashlimim alav ela karov. Everybody agrees that you can only have a karov, and that's exactly what we saw before. So now they say Rav Yosef matne kasher. Rav Yosef has a whole different version. He says, let's go back to the statement of Rabbi Zera, who passed it down in the name of Rabbi Ava eventually. So, aval ksharav, I'm specifically talking about that last line. Ksharav, shlosha, ve'edav shnayim. If there's 3 ties and 2 witnesses only. Divrei hakol emash limim alav ela. Instead of karov, he has kasher. Only an aid kasher. To which they then say, v'hatanya karov, but doesn't it say karov in the Braita? In other words, we understand maybe Rabbi Zera's statement said it has to be fully kasher, but then it goes against the Braita, because the Braita said karov. To which Amar Papa Tnei Kasher. Oh, change it to Kasher. Okay, so what we had here in this section, first of all, we talked about what's the issue with the Get Kereach Bichlal. Why, if it's missing a signature, is a problem because we're worried. Maybe he said Kulchem and they didn't all sign. Then we said, right, we have this machloket, Rabbi Akiva ben Nanas, about who could be the last signature. And then we said, right, what's the reason why Rabbi Akiva permits, right, is worried about, only permits the relative and not the others. And that's because we're worried people might come to incorrect conclusions about the freed slave, Gazlan, who did tshuva. Okay, that explains him. And then we have the statement of Rabbi Zera, who passed it down in the name of a bunch of others, passed it down in the name of Rabbi Ava about that the whole machloket is about the 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th signature, but the 3rd signature has to be a karov, or according to the other version, the 3rd signature has to be a totally kosher witness, because then we 100% compare it to regular get. 3 in get b'kushar is like 2 in a regular get, and then you would just have to change some of the words, right, in the Braita. You would have to change that one word in the Braita, which supported that reading. Okay, last thing for today. They only permitted 1 kosher aid in general, meaning until now we kind of thought as long as you have 2 kosher, and let's say, right, all the rest could be relatives, or all the rest, according to Ben Nanas, could be any kind, or an Eved, any of that, as long as, right, once you're past 3, let's say, if you go with Rabbi Zera. So once you pass 3 has to be, you can have 2, right? In the worst case scenario, you can have 2 perfectly kosher witnesses, 3rd relative, if you go not with Rabbi Yosef's version, and then all the rest can be anyone. But he says, no. We only allow 1 relative, or if you're Ben Nanas, then, a pasul, aval trelo, but not 2. Why? Because when you go to validate this in the court, what are you going to have to do? So since a regular get, you have to validate 2 signatures, and a get in kushar, you have to validate 3. 3 out of it could be out of 5, out of 6, out of 7. So if you, right, this is just a simple mathematical thing. If you take 3 out of this mix of all different kinds, you might end up taking all disqualified witnesses. So therefore, we want to make it only 1 is allowed to be not standard, because then every 3 you take will include 2 kosher and only 1 non-kosher, and then you can validate it really based on the 2 kosher witnesses. So that's a reason why this wouldn't work in that way. Okay, that's it for today. We kind of reviewed as we went along, so we'll stop here. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov.